All right. So, Paul, it's great to have you here and welcome to this spiritual emotional intelligence conversation. And Jim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Jim Vaive, and I am with the Spirit of EQ, which is a spiritual emotional intelligence training company. And we train because of Zoom all over the world. And we talk about spiritual intelligence differently than you might think.
Thanks, Jim. And I'm Lynette, actually married to Jim. And we have a couple of hats. Today we have on our Spirit of EQ hat. And Spirit of EQ is a preferred partner of 6 Seconds. So you'll notice as we go a little deeper, we'll refer to 6 Seconds, who is the company with which the spiritual emotional intelligence assessment has been developed as a customized version of their SAY assessment.
And I do need to say something very important at this moment.
Go ahead,
And
Jim.
that is that I'm very thankful that you are married to me.
Well done. What have you got in mind, Jim? Have you got something planned that you want to go for a boys' trip away or something? Is that the?
Yes, I'll be over to England shortly.
All right, so let me introduce our topic and then I'll take the slides down. And then Jim has a little story that he's going to share. So here's our topic for today. As we go deeper into the session later on, we'll share with you the model of spiritual emotional intelligence that we're working with. But we've tried to make these sessions a little more free form, if you will, and not talk about just the assessment or just the model, but some concepts that can apply to areas that may affect your spirit. And how can emotional intelligence be combined with a consideration of how your spirit's doing as we begin to practice what we call spiritual emotional intelligence. So today we're really talking about, this question, who are you? And how does stillness and awareness contribute to that? So I'm going to stop the share, Jim, and go ahead if you'd like to share a story.
Well, so from a stillness perspective, let's ask Paul. Paul, what do you think about stillness?
I think that the word that sprung to mind first was absence. So, and so almost necessarily not what it is particularly, but it felt like what it isn't. And I think there's that sense of noise. I know my mind just often like bounces from one thing to the other, or if there's like a lot of input. And I think it feels like that sort of absence of that noise and that bouncing around is what springs to mind.
Yep. And that is a wonderful definition that most people subscribe to. Maybe let's look at it from a little bit of a different standpoint. And I'm going to tell a story to illustrate this. Think about stillness as being able to hear that still small voice that's inside of you. Even in the midst of a noisy boulevard, which is your life, this journey we call life. And if we are still at times, or as often as we can be, we can hear that still small voice speaking to us in language that only we can understand. So I was laying on a dock, and it was in May, and it was warm, perfect temperature, and my hand was dragging in the water. And a still small voice spoke to me because I was so utterly still. And it said, get up and move. Get up and move in a way that reflects the joy that you have for this moment. And I declined because, being the individual that I am, my still small voice was not strong enough to make me jump up and take advantage of the moment. Well, a little while later, the voice said, you better get up and you better do this movement because this is an unusual time. And I got up and I started moving, and there was no rhyme or reason to my movement. but I was moving and I was feeling the sun beating down. There was a sense of purpose. There was a sense of knowing, belonging. It was like almost that somebody unzipped my head and honey was being poured inside of me, and I felt sweet. Now, how do you feel sweet? I don't know, but that's what I felt. And I realized in that moment that I had been utterly still, even though I was moving, even though there was noise going on around me. I was feeling the presence of the moment. The moment was speaking to me, and I took the time to hear it. And that memory that I have, I cherish. I go to that place when I'm under stress at this point, because that was probably one of the more unusual experiences I've had in my life. Back to you, Lynette.
Thank you, Jim, for sharing that. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I have a quote I'd like you to take a look at and see what comes up for you. So I won't read it, but I'll give you a moment to read it. And when you read this, what are some feelings that come up for you? And either Jim or Paul.
Well, I just wonder why we have to carry other people's problems to the point where we get tired. What's behind that?
I think there's always a sense of responsibility, isn't there? I think we all have our relationships in life, whether that's professional ones in terms of sort of clients or contacts, but I guess personal ones too, in terms of sort of the relationships that you form. Yeah, it's strange because we certainly, yeah, me looking at that, I don't really ever feel like I'm maybe carrying other people's woes, or certainly not as a regular thing. I think my own are the weightiest ones. I think more than anything else. And I think even that returning home bit is the bit, giving of myself externally almost feels like a freedom from my own challenges. So, hesitating maybe the recording thing in terms of a strange analogy, but even something as tragic as a bereavement, like feels like an external thing that I've got no control over and seem more better able to cope with, where the internal sort of challenges and worries and fears are the bits that I find weighty. So that returning back home to me probably feels as at times it's more chaotic there than it is in those external parts of me life. I don't know if that sounds unusual or strange.
Well, I think it makes a lot of sense, Paul. I mean, we have all of these externals going on. And for some of us, our jobs are related to helping to carry other people's problems, even in the realm of coaching. Yeah. If you're not having boundaries that protect your spirit and your emotions, if you will, those, even that work becomes very weighty. On the other hand, sometimes the externals can feel more ordered, if you will, than what's happening on the inside.
Yeah.
In
the sense of that sometimes that lack of controllability means that I just a bit more free to it, where the expectation of internal is that you should be able to manage yourself better. So that's probably where I feel some of that. Sorry, I know in some of the sessions with Jim, I use the word should too often. So I would apologize in advance for that.
I was just getting ready to say what other word might be more inviting to consider this topic.
Yeah, I know this. I do say could more often, Jim, I promise.
I was also thinking about the part that says shifting your energy back inwards.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was going to say, what does reuniting with peace again mean? That would mean that we have an understanding of what peace means to begin with, and where did that start? And one of the things that for me that I've been reflecting on is that I have peace as a child that I don't have now. And it was just naturally part of who I was. I didn't know anything about spirituality. I didn't know anything about religion. I didn't know anything about those other things, but I knew what peace meant. And I knew that I could go to a happy place. And I wonder if going back to your peace again means that you can go back to the innocence that you had as a child.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's true. And I think this, I think we develop all of the layers over a period of time that have added on in order for us to adapt to life as it feels as you go through. And so that's that protection, maybe like the tree where you're building the bark, there's like the rings. And so the core essence of what was you as a little saplings is it feels like so long ago, it's hard to imagine what that felt like.
So as we think about this topic of a stillness, and let me go back to the title slide, stillness and awareness, coming back to this concept, how do you think stillness can affect your ability to grow or maintain awareness for yourself?
I think there's a focus to it. So, it's really hard to be genuinely aware about what's going on with you if there is so much input that's going on, or you're focusing on maybe some of those external things that are providing that weight and the worry. I was just wondering there in terms of where that stillness sits, like in terms of your physical body. I don't know. I was just thinking, is there like an epicenter somewhere? Just thinking about, the challenging things in life that are maybe more like, I tend to feel those in my stomach. I guess that maybe feels like you've got worry or anxiety. And I think it's almost like it feels like your mind sort of travels to that point more regularly than it might do somewhere else. And maybe because even though I do a lot of thinking, I don't know that I'll spend it in sort of doing a review about how I'm feeling. I don't know whether this is like almost a different thing in a different place. Yeah, not sure.
Could I add one more part to what Paul just said?
Sure.
So what I was thinking about with my story is that the stillness helps us to hear that voice, that still small voice, that isness that we are, like the Paulness or the Jimness or the Lynette-ness of who we are. And maybe that helps us get awareness because it cuts through all the clutter.
And I think from a conceptual mental point of view, I'm sort of working at like trying to imagine what that must be like. But it almost feels like an otherworldliness that feels a bit distant from where I am now. So that's why it feels it's hard to sort of not just say, oh, well, you want to go to another part of the country and you can visualize yourself like getting on a train or a plane or something, or a bus to get there, you can see a route. But this almost, feels like sort of explaining some maybe concepts to a child that they just can't even imagine what that might be. So that's probably me in terms of that sort of genuine comprehension of what the landscape of that stillness looks like. Just feels quite alien.
I can relate to that, Paul. For many years, I was on this treadmill of carrying everyone else's burdens and beginning to consider a concept like stillness could have been from another planet as far as I was concerned. And now when I read a quote like this, I think about the reminder of self-empathy. And that comes into all of this for me. You know, when I'm tired, when I feel spent in service to other people, what do I need to help me be able to continue service? And for myself, it's this shift. And you mentioned thoughts and feelings, and of course, actions go along with that. For me, the wheel that keeps going faster and faster, that treadmill or the monkey wheel or the hamster wheel or whatever analogy works. For me, most often it's the thoughts that keep that spinning, 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 spinning. And when I slow it down enough, say, all right, so what are you feeling right now? And what's really going on? What are you doing?
Well, that sort of leads into this quote, doesn't it?
It does.
Do you mind if I read that quote?
No, go right ahead.
Well, there's a quote by a gentleman named Eckhart Tolle. Have you ever heard of Eckhart Tolle, Paul?
The name rings a bell.
Well, he is a unique individual on so many levels, it's not even funny. But let's just say that he is profound in some of his observations. So let me read this quote. It's a little bit long, but I think it'll give us some fodder for our conversation. Many people who are going through the early stages of awakening process are no longer certain what their outer purpose is. What drives the world no longer drives them. Seeing the madness of our civilization so clearly, they feel somewhat alienated from the culture around them. Some feel that they inhabit a no man's land between the two worlds. They are no longer run by the ego, yet the rising awareness has not yet become fully integrated into their lives. Inner and outer purpose have not yet merged. What does that suggest?
For me, suggests that one thing is it's normal to feel that sort of, I guess, that dissonance. When you start to sort of do that self-exploration, to understand that there's going to be some clashes between that and what feels like the life you've led so far and how you sort of project yourself. And I guess what comes into my mind, and that's probably because it's just maybe my particular journey that I'm on, and just relating back to your story before, Jim, in that sort of almost childlike, sort of innocent glee and going with the moment, you know, absent of self-consciousness and maybe embarrassment or shame or whatever that people might feel as an adult to, you know, move around, you know, especially if you think there's other people watching. Almost that spirituality in your day-to-day life and still be able to make a living, like, feels like two different things. So, you know, having a successful business that earns you money, like, feels there's so many like barriers and hurdles you've got to jump through just because you have. Being your authentic, I feel quite emotional today, so I'm going to go out there and be emotional with people, or you know, I feel quite glum and I'm going to be glum, or, you know, just really listening, or, you know, happy and ecstatic. I just don't know, it just feels like, how can you really truly bring that to the world and still, you know, be employable after that? So they just, it feels like a lovely idyllic state, but maybe this is where my thinking brain's kicking in. It feels sort of almost an unrealistic one, you know, to me, not to other people doing it, I guess, but for me, it feels that way.
So, Paul, I went to this picture while Jim was reading on purpose. So what do you see in this picture, or what do you feel when you look at this picture?
I think there is a tranquility there with that. I noticed the horizon, which sort of almost feels sort of endless in a way. The sort of the two rock outcrops, coming together felt like a narrowing. So as whilst there's like a horizon beyond there, it feels like sort of a closing in on maybe what the direction's going to be. There's light and dark. I don't know whether it's a morning or an evening, actually. I don't know what time of day it is. Yeah, so those are the things that immediately spring to mind visually with that.
Thank you. That word tranquility that you used is one that I immediately thought of, in thinking about this topic of stillness. Immediately, when I saw this picture, I'm like, that's what stillness means to me, that tranquility. The world has not gone away. There are still things happening, but this moment, when I look at this picture, it makes me want to go, ah. What do you see, Jim?
I see two waters mixing together. I would assume that based on what I'm seeing here, this is either a fjord or a river coming into an ocean or a larger body of water. And I would say that the two waters are mixing flawlessly. Maybe the inner and the outer coming together in a dance. One giving a little bit, the other pushing a little bit, and then vice versa. And doing it in such a way that it makes sense for it.
As you're talking, I also see a lack of striving, lack of pushing and pulling, an allowance of the settling. And that's kind of what stillness means to me in terms of awareness. Can we take that moment of tranquility and just use that to restore? We talked about the word spirit, but can that be restorative to our spirit when the outer is constantly busy, constantly demanding of our time? Are we aware when we are in need of that moment of tranquility?
Just made me think briefly about, I wonder if there is, I never thought about this before. Obviously the tide comes in and the tide goes out. Is there a moment when the tide is neither coming in or going out? It reaches its midpoint. I've never thought about that before.
And I don't know scientifically what the answer is, Paul, but I hear equilibrium sort of being that state.
Yeah. And I think that it's important to understand that this space that we're talking about, all things are possible. If we guys look at all the different descriptions we had of this space, it's I think the descriptions that we were having have a lot to do with what we wish would happen for us.
And maybe some of our past coming forward, what's the frame as we vision stillness or vision tranquility? What's the frame that we bring with us? Jim talked about his early childhood self. That may be something that each of us has viewed a little differently. Maybe my early childhood self had a different place in time, and there were other things that added to that sense of stillness there. So Jim, here is another Eckhart Tolle quote.
This has a lot to do, that quote has a lot to do with Eckhart Tolle and how he came to all of this understanding. And when he was sitting on the park bench in the park, and the pigeons were landing on him and pooping on him and not really caring whether he was sitting there, and he would feed them, of course. He was just sitting there in the midst of that noise. And he was aware of the stillness. And the stillness started speaking to him so loudly that everything else was drawn out. And that inner space that he's talking about is being able to look at the world with different eyes and be okay with what happens and be a presence in the world that brings peace, awareness, consciousness to the people around us.
Any thoughts for you, Paul?
Thoughts and feelings around that. Still feels, I think, a little bit otherworldly. And just thinking too practically around, okay, so, sitting on a park bench in a busy place, and I'm trying to find that stillness. Almost like when the stillness is finished, the world still comes crashing in, after that 5 minutes or something. So what was its value? Do you know what I mean? It's almost like, is it of a moment, and how does that support what comes next? So maybe that's thinking too practically, and that's part of the trouble, as opposed to really sort of being able to carry that with me more often, and for that to really shape how I then go about living my working life and my other life, ongoing. So that's just maybe some of that initial thinking that I've got.
So Jim, why don't you share the story of when you were teaching me to meditate? Because that's what I think back to when I read this quote.
Well, so Lynette and I had started this journey about spiritual awareness, or what is called waking up. And Anthony DeMello coins that waking up back in the 60s. He says that most people are asleep and they go through life totally asleep. And what stillness does, very oddly, because it would not seem to be this way, is it wakes us up. So Lynette wanted to learn how to meditate, and I was working to teach her in those areas. And we decided that we would go to a mall where there were many stores and many people walking around, yelling, screaming, pushing, shoving, making all kinds of general noise. And Lynette and I sat down in the middle of them and started meditating. And Lynette was able to do that with flawless execution. And when you go ahead.
Only because he had led me through some baby steps up to that point.
And being able to silence oneself in the middle of noise is the greatest gift that we can give to ourselves and to the people around us.
I think for myself, when I am able to be still on a regular basis, my capacity for carrying some of those burdens of others is increased, and my own awareness of how I need to maintain my own practices in order to do that feels much more in balance. When I'm too busy and I do not have time for the stillness, then my wheel just turns faster and faster and faster and faster.
And you know, in terms of things that you do to consciously practice that, like what are the things that you would typically do for that?
For me, it's the meditation, which what I mean by that is sitting down with my eyes closed, relaxed, feet on the floor. So I'm feeling the grounding of the earth and wherever I'm sitting, and feeling that sense of safety in where I am, and just letting go as thoughts come. Jim taught me this analogy. So I see in my head the boat coming, and I put the thoughts on there and they go down the river. And more thoughts come and I put them on the next boat and they go down the river. So that after, you know, I couldn't do it long at the beginning because my brain was going, thoughts were very, very active in there, even to do it 5 minutes, and then to be able to do it 10 minutes, until I was able to do it more regularly for 20 minutes, not every day, but when I can. My ability then to handle everything else that's external increases. Jim, you want to share some of your experiences?
With meditation.
Mhm.
Meditation is important for human beings for a variety of reasons. And frankly, I believe that they should teach meditation in every school across the world to make that a part of the way that we live our lives, not just ask you if you want to do it, but to make it part of the mainstream. And the reason for this is meditation is a lot of the people that are listening to this podcast know that it takes us from the sympathetic nervous system, which is the alert nervous system, the one that gets things done, the one that pays attention to danger and other places and things going on in our lives, and helps us to move over to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the healing nervous system. And just a couple of quick stories. I was able to lower my blood pressure and my heart rate over a period of 10 minutes by meditating. And it's not because I just did it the one time and I lowered it, it's because I've been practicing it. But the meditation signals my body to understand that it's time to go into a relaxed state. And I'm able to do that fairly easily. And Lynette has always been amazed by the fact that I can go to sleep in a second and wake up in a second, which is part of what I'm talking about here. Because maybe I'm not really asleep. Maybe I'm being in a place where I can perceive what's going on around me, but I'm at a place of peace and awareness.
I think too, Paul, there are other times when I don't have that period of time, but can I come to a place of stillness? You know, maybe right before I'm getting ready to facilitate a training or do a workshop of some kind. And so in the moment, how do I come to a physical and spiritual and emotional place of stillness? And one of the things that I've done is shortcut the 6 seconds. You know, what am I feeling? What options do I have? What do I really want? One of those things that helps me go to a place of stillness is just take a deep breath and ask myself, what do you need? What do you need right now? And it's quick. The other questions are sort of implied, but what do you need? And for me to identify that, I have to sort of consider, okay, externally, what's happening that may be impinging on that sense of peace and stillness within? And what of that can I provide for myself? And part of that, I think, is because the regular practice of stillness lets me know it's there And if I need to take a shortcut there occasionally, I know how for myself, which may be different for each individual, but knowing it's possible says, check in, even if it's just 60 seconds, don't forget to check in.
And is there a sense where that stillness is around, I guess, fully connecting with yourself, or is it like connecting yourself with the world, I guess, the physical world? How would you describe that?
It's really interesting that you should ask that question. So let me just share this with you. This is actually the model of spiritual emotional intelligence. And so when we were talking about stillness, I was thinking it more in terms of awareness, that being our connection with ourselves. But it's balanced by our connection with other people in this belonging domain and with the world at large in this insight domain. So all of those are part of the practice of spiritual emotional intelligence. And I believe they all support each other. So our ability to be connected to ourselves helps us then be connected to the world and to other people that we know well in a different way than if we were disconnected with ourselves.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you? Is that kind of a sort of logical connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think the awareness bit is important, because I think it's really difficult to connect with others and connect with the world if you're not really connected to yourself. I think that it feels like animal is sort of a circle, so I guess it goes around, and but almost that one, without that, the other two would fall down. The self-awareness bit would potentially support you in helping the others, but to say you've got belonging without really knowing what's going on within you would feel like a tricky thing to do.
Yeah. And since this is all based on, the 6 seconds model of emotional intelligence, that knowing how important it is to balance, know yourself, choose yourself, give yourself, you might even think of this as another leg of that, align yourself. So taking all that emotional intelligence foundation and adding that piece of our connection with spirit for ourselves, for other people, and for the world at large. And, earlier in our conversation, you talked about being non-religious, and this concept does not require that you be religious. It requires a cognition and an acceptance that there is another component of each of us as human beings that includes our spirit. And even if you don't buy that, it's an interesting concept to consider. Is there something beyond my body, my mind, and my emotions? So when we actually talk about what is spiritual emotional intelligence, it's taking both that emotional intelligence and the spiritual insight to create more meaning and fullness in our lives.
And I think, again, that sort of spiritual element is something that I admit I do sort of struggle with, because to feel like you believe in a higher being, or as an entity, but even that sort of connection with like the world, I think, and just feeling like your collection of molecules is, and I know it must be connected to the world and its molecules, but like making sense of that in a way that really allows you to feel that connection, but that it also has, and I know it shouldn't have a practical purpose, but it just feels like that, fine if it is, but what difference does it make? And I think that's the bit where probably I would struggle with most.
It's interesting that you should say that, Paul, because when we were first talking about this whole the spiritual dimension and what are these parts. When we were talking about this insight dimension. Okay, so is it necessary to believe in a higher power? And the answer is no, because there are still other human beings that none of us know. And you've been around the world enough, I'm sure, to realize, even on Zoom, to realize that when we come together as human beings, there can easily be connection. And that also helps us even conceptually to realize on some level, we all have a lot of similarities, and there are people out there that I may not know, but what do I wish for the world? So whether or not we call it, if you have a vertical dimension to your insight, that's where it would be if you have a belief in a higher power. But even if it's more horizontal and you're not sure about that higher power piece, there's still this bigger concept outside of myself and the people that I know well. There's more out there than just me and mind.
Yeah. No, and I get that. And I think the bit about, and I guess maybe I would have put that into belonging in terms of that feeling of community and supporting others is a one which very much I can see and I believe in. I guess it's it puts in mind sort of, I don't know, where people hug trees and stuff, you know what I mean? This sort of insight, but it's almost like that connection with the world, that's the bit where I'm sort of imagining that and then thinking, okay, I don't really feel sometimes part of that feels like a distant thing, whereas with others and that connection with others feels an obvious thing for me.
And that's part of this whole dimension. When we actually do measurements on an assessment, some of that balance is what's measured. And there is no right or wrong, just like an emotional intelligence assessment. There is no right or wrong. This is what the data is showing. It's saying where you are right now. And that may not be important. Later in your life, you may find it's more important. At different times, you feel like your awareness is kind of on autopilot now. Now I want to focus more on my relationships with people I know in that belonging sphere. Or maybe I want to pay a little more attention to what's happening outside my closer circle.
Yeah. And so the assessment, is there a bit where you've got this, is it the SAID at its core, but then added in some extra questions that relate to that spirituality?
Yes, exactly. It's right now we just have the profile report out. We're working on a level B. I think we're going to call it an SEQ development report to have a little more breadth and depth to it. But the profile version's probably been out about 5 years now. So
it would be interesting to see, I guess, the additional questions. Is it all of the say questions?
It is all of the say plus, I want to say 99 total. So maybe like 22 additional questions to the 77 in the original say.
Yeah. It'd just be interesting maybe for me to get that sort of concept bit in the head, like understanding what those questions might look like, so you can identify, like, oh, right, okay, that's what, by asking the question, you're then determining some of that spirituality element, really. Yeah.
Well, I think there would be no problem at all if you wanted to take the assessment and have one of us debrief you. So we'd be happy to, or somebody else from Spirit of EQ could do that if you're interested in that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'll do the assessment. That would be good.
Okay, Jim. So why don't you make note of that? Maybe you can have Eric do it. Eric is the managing partner of Spirit of EQ right now.
Yeah, I can introduce you to.
And that would be great. And then you can try it out and see what it's like. And hopefully some of those questions will spark some consideration of some of these areas of life. It's an interesting thing. All of this custom assessments that 6 Seconds has done with partners. How just a few more questions takes everything that we know from the emotional intelligence realm and adds another dimension. So it's a lovely way to expand not only our tool set, but also expand our personal area of life. What's a growing edge for me, or what do I want to explore more?
And is there a sense where, thinking about this in terms of, it's about, the emotional intelligence, it's, emotions, but with a practical purpose in mind, that making it a real thing. So when you're sort of working with people, is that like, I don't know, just people in the street, or is it like within organizations? Do organizations really have this in mind? Do they care whether somebody's spiritually, emotional, or intelligent, and what difference will it make to their business? I don't know. Just how is it being used as a practical tool in what sort of environments?
So Jim, I'll answer a couple, then I'll throw it to you in case you know of others. Sometimes coaches use it. Some coaches are spiritual coaches in addition to, whatever else they're coaching. There's a realm of people called spiritual directors that may be using the assessment. We haven't really tapped that market as much, but it's always been on the back burner of a group of people that we are interested in working with. We've had several folks, I don't know if you know Ajane Wilcoxon. He did his doctoral thesis, I don't know the exact topic, but he's using it for some research with people that study this. We've had some pastors that are also coaches that find it a good fit in that ministry type realm. We've had some church groups use it. So it can be in a religious frame, but it certainly doesn't have to be. So people that are more interested in exploring what does that realm of spirit add, or what does the exploration of that realm, how does that help us when we're working with clients? Jim, did you have some other thoughts on that?
I really don't have anything else to add. I think you covered it really well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I guess probably because the realms I work with are more, I guess, that commercial entities, as opposed to other coaches, and as opposed to, I guess, those sort of, settings where you might expect, people to be interested. So around, in those religious settings, you can see why that would be a good starting point for people to explore that. And I just sometimes, organizations struggle to even get the EQ bit, even though the data's there. Never mind that the spiritual element, which feels probably a little bit more ethereal than, even EQ. So no, I was just interested in that part.
We can certainly see the effects of it, although we can't touch, taste, and feel it like some other things.
Yeah,
all right, so I wanted to leave us with this poem. I thought this was interesting. Nothing was capitalized in this poem. So take a minute and let's see what you think. And Jim, we'll let you go ahead and do this whenever you're ready.
Yeah, so we're not going to read it though.
I wasn't going to read it out loud because I think people can read,
Paul,
unless you'd like to read it.
No.
So what comes up for you, Jim? You want to go first and then we'll go to Paul?
Well, I think what comes up for me on this poem is that it's a choice that we make. We always have to make a choice to be still or noisy. We have to make a choice to be loud or quiet. And the question is, what is our spirit, if you will, hungering for? And this just helps to describe that in a very profound way for me.
Thanks, Jim. What comes up for you, Paul?
When I talked at the beginning about an absence, and I think that I guess it feels like that bit about clearing your shelf, but then I don't know, then it allows you to put something else in there. So I think that bit about creativity to flourish. Mm-hmm. So it's almost, yes, there's a stillness there, but you're moving stuff out the way that allows, room for that next thing or that next insight. So that's what sort of sprung to mind from that. And just as much as it talks about stillness, there's a lot of activity there. You know, taste, allow, breathe, you know, create. You know, there's just some great words there about doing bathe. So yeah, that sort of almost sort of opposite, you know, dichotomy between, you know, doing nothing and yet still doing something. Feels like a strange one, but somehow a right one.
As you were talking before about, you know, the spiritual element being sort of ethereal, I wonder if this is an invitation to take what we know that we understand to be concrete concepts and help use them to help us begin to connect with some of these things that are less concrete. When I read this, it's just a reminder, let's slow that treadmill. Let's stop the hamster wheel, if only for a moment, and reconnect with ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that is all that we have, Paul. And so I really appreciate you joining us and allowing us to record today.
No problem
Thank
at
you.
all. Thank you very much for your time. No, really appreciate that. That was good sort of insight, good food for thought. Yeah, and looking forward to obviously finding out a bit more.
Thank you. And we do too. I'm going to stop the recording.